Now, a page from our Sunday morning almanac. October 19th, 1862. The debut of a future filmmaking pioneer. For that was the day Auguste Lumiere was born in a small town in France. Together with his younger brother, Louis, Auguste Lumiere improved on Thomas Edison's early projector, making it possible for more than one person at a time to watch a movie. Their first exhibition in late December 1895 featured 10 short films, beginning with a shot of workers leaving the Lumiere factory. Cutting-edge cinema for its time, believe it or not. In 1897, they startled audiences with this sequence of a train arriving at a station. Realistic enough that some easily panicked viewers reportedly headed for the exits. More shocking still that year was this sequence of a dancing skeleton. Scary stuff, no bones about it. Other films would follow, though in 1910, Auguste Lumiere left the movie business and devoted the rest of his life to medical research. He died in 1954 at the age of 91, but his early filmmaking efforts are still remembered by this star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Early last century, a lovable tramp waddled across silent film screens the world over, amusing audiences entranced by this new form of entertainment, the motion picture. And Charlie Chaplin, the man behind the mustache, became an instant celebrity.
He was the first global superstar.
Chaplin biographer Jeffrey Vance.
I mean, everybody wanted to meet him. People like Churchill and Einstein, Gandhi and Bernard Shaw, all these people wanted to meet Charlie Chaplin. And this was just this little Cockney lad from South London, and he had this incredible fame, unprecedented fame.
Now, 90 years after the iconic tramp first captured the hearts and funny bones of moviegoers, the story of the Cockney lad from South London is being told anew. In Jeffrey Vance's coffee table-sized Chaplin biography, a new documentary about Chaplin's life on screen and off, and the DVD release of 4 restored Chaplin films, with 4 others soon to come.
I just really believe he's one of those master spirits of the 20th century. I think what Shakespeare is to Elizabethan theater and Dickens to the Victorian novel and Picasso to modern art, Charlie Chaplin is to 20th century cinema.
It's an improbable rags-to-riches story. Born in poverty to a mother who went insane and a father who died an alcoholic, Chaplin would survive a workhouse for destitute children to become a teenage performer in London music halls, landing in Hollywood at age 26. It was there, in 1914, the Tramp was born.
The Tramp was a kind of everyman. People just identified with that little guy.
Time magazine film critic and Chaplin documentary producer Richard Schickel.
He had all the troubles they have. You know, he was always out of work or worrying about getting a job. He was always mooning after the girl and not necessarily getting the girl. But there was always some optimism in that little figure heading off down the road. He always left people with that sweet hope.
The public got its first look at the Tramp in 1914 in the short Kid Auto Races at Venice, where the Tramp was a nuisance to a camera crew.
Was the character an instant success, the Tramp?
Instantly. And all a theater manager had to do was create his own primitive cutout of the silhouette with the writing underneath, "He's here today." And audiences would flock to the theater.
In 1921, he was the protective father figure to an orphan in The Kid, the first feature-length film he wrote and directed.
It's the first indication of really a soul in a film character. He mixed sentiment, slapstick, and dramatic sequences in a comedy, and it had not been done before.
And the 1925 classic, The Gold Rush, another of the restored films being re-released.
Well, this has got all of his iconic sequences, you know. Him on the verge of starvation, boiling and eating his shoe and eating it as if it were a Thanksgiving feast. The dance of the dinner rolls. And that wonderful sequence of thrill comedy of him with the teetering cabin. But more than that, it's how he uses those comedy sequences in a character-driven narrative.
The Circus in 1928, lesser known but perhaps Chaplin's funniest film, especially hilarious considering what he overcame to make it.
It was like the four horsemen of the apocalypse came after him during the film.
Sets destroyed by fire, a divorce suit by a second wife that shut down production for 8 months, an IRS bill for $1 million in back taxes. But the show went on.
How he made such a beautiful and wonderful comedy with all these terrible things happening to him behind the scenes is just tremendous.
His behind-the-scenes life caused problems later on. His fondness for teenage girls, his several marriages, his leftist politics, but not before he came to dominate the early days of Hollywood. He built his own studio and in partnership with Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith, formed United Artists to distribute his pictures. He was the star, the writer, producer, director, editor, and composer. Even financed the films himself, whatever it took to get the movies just the way he wanted them.
I mean, he would literally go 40, 50, 60, 70 times on the same shot. I think that had to do with the kinetic nature of what he was doing. He could imagine the sequence in general terms, but he really had to get up on his feet and work it out in front of the camera and see what he was doing.
In 1931, the tramp helps a blind flower girl in one of Chaplin's greatest works, City Lights.
That is his most lyrical and sublime film, really. I mean, it's the comedy, romance, just the apex of the tramp character. And that ending, the celebrated ending of City Lights. Probably the greatest close-up ever in films.
And in 1936, Modern Times, Chaplin's statement on the industrial age. Sound films had doomed silent pictures years before, and it was time for the tramp to bow out.
He just felt that he was a silent artist and that he had perfected that language of pantomime, and he thought he would lose something if he spoke.
He made a handful of sound films, notably The Great Dictator, his slam of Hitler in 1940, with the famous Dance of the Globe.
Woke up, I'm the greatest show on earth.
And Limelight, his 1952 film about a fading comedy star set in London's music hall era.
I was well aware that I was working with a genius.
His co-star was a 19-year-old awestruck British actress named Claire Bloom.
There was nobody like him, and there never has been, there never will be.
When Chaplin sailed for London and the world premiere of Limelight, the United States revoked his re-entry permit amid questions about his moral character and communist sympathies. Chaplin was outraged.
Very defiant, very disgusted with the American government, as well he should have been, determined to save what he could from the wreck. Very hurt.
Sidney Chaplin, a son from Charlie's second marriage, also appeared in Limelight and recalled his father's exile.
That was the time of the blacklisting in Hollywood and all of that. And it was always insinuated that he was, a communist, and a very rich communist, I'll tell you that.
With his fourth wife, Eugene O'Neill's daughter Una, and their children, Chaplin settled in Switzerland, as we see in these rare, recently released home movies. He would make a few more films and make one last trip to America, nearly 20 years after going into exile, to accept an Academy Award, an acknowledged genius who never tired of the applause. Sidney Chaplin likes to tell of an incident in the late 40s at what was then, as now, the lone silent film theater in Hollywood.
And they had a Chaplin, a bunch of Chaplin shorts, oldies, really old. The whole evening was ruined by some moron in the back laughing so damn hard that people were saying, "Shut up," back there. And the lights go up and we start to leave and it's my father sitting back there laughing at his own stuff. You know?
Even after he'd lost most of his audience to talking pictures, Charlie Chaplin still liked what he saw, still enjoyed his inspired creation, the tramp who made it against all odds.
Now arriving back on the scene, it's Buster Keaton. Silent film star, comedian, acrobat, director, special effects innovator, and now the subject of 2 new biographies and an upcoming movie.
He was way ahead of his time, even as a sort of film pioneer.
Bill Irwin is a stage and screen actor and a famous clown himself. What influence did Buster Keaton have on you?
He's a great storyteller. I just want to be able to speak with the body the way he can. I remember that from being a young clown.
You got pretty good at it.
I kept trying.
Keaton began performing at age 4 in his parents' vaudeville act.
It was about a mischievous boy taunting his father on stage, and the father then grabbing the son, often by a suitcase handle that his mother sewed onto the back of his costume, and just kick him around the stage, throw him into the scenery, throw him into the backdrop.
Dana Stevens is the movie critic for Slate. Her new book is published by Simon & Schuster, a division of Paramount Global. We met at Kaufman Astoria Studios, where Keaton and other silent film stars once made their movies.
He never got to go to school, he never had a steady home, but he always talked about his childhood as something that he was very happy to have had.
Keaton's golden age began in 1920 when he wrote, directed, and starred in what are now considered some of the best movies ever made. His nickname was the Great Stone Face. He never smiled on camera. As he said in a 1960 interview,
Well, you see, I learned that from the stage. If I laughed at what I did, the audience didn't. So by the time I went into pictures, not smiling was mechanical with me.
Here's guy, he doesn't flinch, and then he gives it a beat before he realizes, and then he reacts.
Bill Irwin finds Keaton genius in this classic gag.
If it were me, I'd go, "Oh, thank God I lived through it," but he went, "Wow," and then he exited.
In 1927, at the peak of his success, Keaton made what he later called the worst mistake of his life. He joined the movie-making machine known as MGM Studios. His improvisational working habits, his creative freedom, and his independent film career were over.
And it really, I think, just broke him as a performer and as a person. His marriage was also falling apart separately from that. He was starting to drink too much.
By 1933, alcoholic and miserable, he had lost his marriage, his home, and even his MGM job. But
I think that it's often focused on a lot, that he had this sort of giant decline.
Keaton Talmadge is a professional voice actor and Buster's great-granddaughter.
The irony isn't lost on me. My great-grandfather made a living being silent, and I make a living talking all the time.
She points out that Buster's life had a third act.
People forget that there was a definite uphill after that, where he contributed to some great comedic television. I got to do commercials and just be on set, where he was in a very happy, wonderful marriage.
And all you do is this.
This 1965 documentary captured some rare footage of Keaton off camera, smiling, in fact.
And it's just sure.
Buster Keaton died at age 70 of lung cancer. But his film work never really left. You can see this Keaton stunt echoed in Mission Impossible 6. Or this Keaton gag living on in the movie Inception. Or Keaton's submarine rescue joke reprised in You Only Live Twice. And, of course, Keaton's house facade gag is one of the most imitated shots in comedy.
So he doesn't make it, he falls out of frame, I hope to some protective net. But then they wrote these gags that got him down the rest of the building. Oh.
According to Bill Irwin, the theme of Keaton's life, its ups and its downs, might be resilience.
You just hit the ground and get back up again. Keaton did that all his life. He hit the floor, hit the ground, got up again.
That's Mary Pickford in vintage form in the 1919 classic Daddy Longlegs, in the role of a feisty orphan always ready to play a prank on snooty visitors.
It was like cool how there was like no sound.
20 years after her death, more than 6 decades after she left show business on her own terms, Mary Pickford is being rediscovered. It was a special night at the old Alamo Theater in Bucksport, Maine. A night to bring a forgotten star back to life on the silver screen. And off to the side, barely visible at the piano, is Philip Carley, lending a musical assist to a silent film classic.
Pickford, you get to work with her, and it's good material because she gives a lot of color and power to the acting.
A half dozen of her silent films are being restored and released as home videos, with new music by composers like Carley. There is Pickford in 1918 at the height of her fame in Stella Maris. And Pickford in Tess of the Storm Country. And there's also Mary Pickford Rediscovered, a lavish new book with rare photographs from her astonishing career.
She was the most popular actress, probably even woman, in America for about 20 years.
Motion Picture Academy archivist Robert Cushman, he selected the...
By 1915, statisticians had come to the conclusion that she was seen globally by 12.5 million people every 24 hours, and that's in 1915. Her popularity was just almost incomprehensible today.
To say a star was born is underestimating it. I remember one review said that when Pickford's face first appeared on the screen, there was a sound around the theatre as though the air was being let out of 1,000 tires. Wonderful expression.
Film historian Kevin Brownlow is the author of Mary Pickford Rediscovered.
She was earning $10,000 a week during the First World War, when a steel worker, which is the highest paid job you can have as a worker, was getting $25.
To movie fans all over the world, Mary Pickford was known as America's sweetheart. But off-camera, she was something more, the most powerful and influential woman in the business, ever. Studio owner, film distributor, producer.
As a business person, she was unparalleled. She did things that no woman in the industry had ever done, much to the disbelief of most of the moguls, including certainly the first woman to make the first percentage deal. Today you hear about points. Her percentage was 50%, and that was in 1916.
Pickford started supporting her family after her father died when she was just 5, first on stage and then in films, pushed all along by her stage mother, an on-the-job education that taught the young actress the art and business of making films.
They weren't primitive, these pictures. You do not feel that these films were made by people struggling towards something. They were made by people who knew exactly what they were doing.
Film historian Kevin Brownlow.
What is exciting about the Mary Pickford films is that they are technically the cream of the crop. She set the standard that everybody else followed.
And she took chances no one else did, like playing opposite herself in the 1918 hit Stella Maris, a technical feat that required rewinding the unexposed film back to the exact spot so Pickford could join her other self in the same scene. And she was a perfectionist, as she explained to historian Brownlow in a rare 1965 audio tape interview.
Well, I always watched the rushes, and my name was Retake Mary Pickford. Because I was never pleased, and that's why I'm not today. I see a picture and I say, well, Mary, you're pretty good in that scene. I see others and I think, why, that's dreadful. I never was satisfied.
It was dissatisfaction with working for someone else that led Pickford to produce her own films and form her own studio, United Artists, with Charlie Chaplin, director D.W. Griffith, and her husband Douglas Fairbanks.
How bright and goodly shines the sun.
The sun? The moon?
And she was tenacious. As silent movies gave way to sound, Pickford co-starred with her husband in Taming of the Shrew, and later stole the show
He was just a beast.
in Coquette.
The man you held close in your arms while his eyes were closed forever by death?
Yes, yes.
The man you said you loved more than life itself?
Yes, and not telling.
The man whose last words were, I love you?
No, don't keep saying that. It's a tragic story. I have to weep a lot. I don't care whether my nose becomes big and fat from tears, from crying, and my face is blistered. If my eyes become small, I'm going to do it. I'm after the Oscar. I'm going to get the Oscar.
Pickford's career spanned 25 years and more than 200 films, most of which she hoped the public would never see again. After retiring in 1933 at the age of 40, America's sweetheart was worried that Americans would find a silent film star laughable. Archivist Robert Cushman.
Her films have not been available largely or totally due to Mary's control over them. She lived in a fear that her films would not be accepted by later generations. She didn't want to be laughed at, and laughed at in the wrong way. But I've always thought that if it was good then, it's good now.
Back in Bucksport, Maine, the audience couldn't seem to get enough of Mary Pickford that special night.
She was super. She's a great actress.
I liked the comedy, and I liked her a lot. She was funny.
More than 60 years later, she still lights up a screen.
Make them laugh, make them cry, and back to laughter. When they see a motion picture, they want to be entertained.
It soared and roared. Movie magic unlike anything America had ever seen. Paramount's 1927 World War I epic Wings had the usual aerial duels, but then came the unusual. Director William Wellman wanted as much reality as possible.
He didn't want any fakery.
His son and biographer, William Wellman Jr., recalls his father's words to the two male stars.
He said, I'm going to do this right. And he told Richard Arlen and Buddy Rogers, you're going to take flying lessons and you're going to fly the planes while you're being photographed.
They flew, Rogers with barely a few hours training, using a button to turn on the mounted camera, risking their lives for the shot. Wellman wanted it right because he was a fighter pilot in World War I. As a B-movie director after the war, he was an unlikely choice to helm the studio's big picture of that year. Studio boss Jesse Lasky asked Wellman what qualified him for the job.
And my father said, my war record does, and I'll make it the best damn picture the studio's ever made.
And did he?
I think he did.
It was more than dives and dogfights. Clara Bow was the studio's top box office star of the day. Before Wings, she starred in the film It, giving rise to the term It Girl. Shapely and sensual, she hated her role as small-town girl and battlefield ambulance driver with that modest military costume that came with it.
She was constantly trying to tighten the belt on the uniform to accentuate her curves, and the costume designer Edith Head would run after her and try and get her to loosen the belt, which she would refuse to do. And in the film you can see, she won.
Producer David Stinn wrote a book on Bow, who proved that sex sells.
There's a famous moment in the film where she actually appears briefly topless, and that brought many more people into the theater than perhaps may have gone without that scene.
With her thick Brooklyn accent, Bow's career did not survive into the era of talkies. But this new kid's did. Gary Cooper had one scene, and with only the power of his presence, a star was born. Wellman's demand for reality cost $2 million, almost twice the budget. But he turned out a blockbuster, rolling in money for the studio, running for years, and winning the very first Academy Award for Best Picture. This was Paramount's main gate in 1927, the year Wings was made, one of the last original structures still in the lot. Paramount was careful to preserve it over the decades, but the movie that won it such acclaim, it was left to disintegrate. Like so many other films of that era, the nitrate stock decomposed. Look at the cloudy margins on either side of the picture. Look at this.
So this is the Paramount vault.
Paramount's chief archivist, Andrea Callis, says the studio scoured the world for the best remaining copy of the film and found it among their many titles, a forgotten backup print made in the 1950s.
And it turned out it was here in our vault the whole time.
The film was digitally restored, down to the groundbreaking orange special effect flames. When the sound era started, the studio would send out a record with music and basic sound effects that could be played in the theater. None survived, so for sound effects, they reached out to sound designer Ben Burt. If his name is not familiar, we all know the sounds he created. The hum of a lightsaber, Darth Vader's breathing,
which is a recording I made of myself breathing through an old aqualung regulator I went to a local scuba shop.
That's you?
It's me, yeah.
And for Wings, he used recordings of old biplanes. So good was Wellman's film that the people who made 1986's Top Gun studied Wellman's dogfight scenes. But Tom Cruise did none of his flying. Indeed, no studio today would dare what Wellman did in 1927, risk the lives of his actors by making them both act and fly to give moviegoers the thrill and terror of combat flying. Wellman believed then there was no other way to make the movie, and that is why we can say of Wings now, there is no other like it.
Can you imagine E.T. without the music? Didn't think so. And in some cases, like Chariots of Fire, even more people may have heard the theme than seen the movie. So is it any wonder that young composers like 34-year-old Michael Picton are yearning to write film scores?
I presume everybody dreams of, walking up to accept the Oscar for the best score.
I've accepted it about 60 times in my mind already, so I have no doubt.
Picton majored in music at McGill University in his native Canada. He writes classical pieces too, but to really shine as a composer, he says, write for film.
It's really one of the few outlets you can have for a large audience. And if you're really an artist, if you're really a musician, you want a large audience. You want your music to be heard, and that's why you write it.
So now he is competing for a chance to win fame and fortune, doing what he loves best.
And then I have this flourish of trumpets for the, his heroic leap into the raging river, which then resolves itself back down as they get back to the shore.
Picton is one of 634 composers between the ages of 18 and 35 who are scoring selected scenes from a Greta Garbo silent film called The Temptress.
If I won this, then it would mean that, maybe I'm not that bad.
34-year-old Matt Hyder.
Well, this is the arrival of Greta Garbo's character in Argentina.
Hyder, a German-born former pre-med student turned musician, and the other young composers are working on this film because they've entered a contest run by Turner Classic Movies. The winner gets $10,000, a chance to score the entire film, and record the composition with an orchestra. Don Ray, former music supervisor for CBS, who now teaches film scoring, has the job of listening to every single one of the entries.
I'm listening for, does it have thematic content? Does it play the scene? Or are they kind of modern and orchestrally conceived?
Ray has been judging ever since Turner Classic started the competition 5 years ago, trying to build a library of scores for its huge collection of silent films. He must boil the 634 entries down to the top 30.
I use a numerical system, and if it makes it up to 9, if it gets to the 9s, that means it has a chance. It's outstanding. And I've had maybe half a dozen 9s, or 9+.
32-year-old Jamie Hall makes the cut. A former University of Michigan saxophone player, he earns his living as a Microsoft engineer. But he can't stop creating music.
Actually, my shower ends up being the place where I do a lot of composing.
Hall's score, for a scene in which Greta Garbo almost gets strangled, embodies his view of how a score should be written.
You do have to be careful in terms of like the hokiness factor. If you do, it can be called, sometimes can be called Mickey Mousing it. Catch the things that are going to be effective and don't try to catch every last movement of the character.
You want to bring people chills. I mean, like, you know, that's the goal, I guess. I mean,
26-year-old Cody Westheimer, who majored in film composition at USC, is also one of the chosen 30.
You know, almost any dramatic film that, you know, makes you cry or gives you chills at the end or even the middle or whatever, if you do that with, it's so difficult to do that without the music. I mean, the music just brings it to life.
He hopes his treatment of the flood scene does just that. Westheimer knows how much winning the contest could mean in an industry that is dominated by fewer than 100 composers.
In a way, it seems like directors and producers are afraid to take a chance on the new guy.
Right, and I've experienced that a couple times already, and it's really, you know, frustrating for me. I mean, it's...
So now the fate of Cody and the others is in the hands of a group of judges, all composers who will watch the 30 final scenes and start throwing out their least favorites, eliminating all but 10 semi-finalists.
Would each of you give me your 5 lowest scores?
I would say number 15, number 12,
9, 6,
15, 11.
The only one I'm disappointed about, I really like number 7, and I guess I'm the only one that did.
Did you say number 7? You liked?
Yeah.
Are you out of your mind?
What were you listening to?
Yeah.
After this day's judging, there's still another round.
Okay. So
and from 600 to 30 to 10, 5 finalists are chosen at last. And all 4 of the contestants we've met make it, along with Matthew Kaczynski. Age 24 with a master's from New York's Juilliard School, he says silents need different music than talking pictures.
You can't be so subtle with a silent film. With a film with dialogue, it's different. You have things to fill in blanks and you know, spots between the music. But
he and the other 4 composers must all score this very same clip where Garbo, the Temptress, is denounced by her lover.
This is a scene where I'm using pitch bending, the liquid in the cocktails spilling, and I'm just building tension here.
But will Matthew's score win the grand prize?
Wait a minute, I have a question. The scale is from 1 to 5.
It's all up to the final panel of judges.
Number 3, he had it was musically cohesive, his ending, even though it may have been a hair over the top.
It seems in a funny way that this is like American Idol for composers.
Friends of mine told me that they didn't mention American Idol. They said it sounded like Film Composer Survivor.
Vote him off! Vote him off!
So which one of these talented young composers will win, and why? We'll find out later on Sunday morning. They are thrilled to be guests in this Los Angeles hotel.
I'm just, well, Cloud 9, you know, and then, you know, right on the roof of it, Cloud 10, that's where I am, so.
Matt Hyder and 4 other aspiring young composers have been chosen from more than 600 entrants in the Turner Classic Movies competition. Now these 5 are competing for a $10,000 cash prize and a chance to score an entire silent film. And maybe, says Michael Picton, break through some barriers.
Well, I think we all know entering a business like this, people say it's really competitive, and they don't know the half of it. It's
For Matthew Kaczynski, for example, a win might convince his family that he was right to walk away from a career as a violinist, struggling instead to make it as a film composer.
And it's just, I get such a rush off of it. And so my parents, I think, were maybe a little disappointed with that decision.
And winning for these contestants, says Cody Westheimer, really is about more than fame and fortune.
I mean, man, I think we all crave working with a live orchestra for an hour and 20 minutes of music. That's a dream. I mean,
so of course, when we asked Jamie Hall, do you feel nervous?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm nervous. I mean, just like all these other guys, I want to win, and it's a nervous thing waiting to hear about who's going to win.
And next door, the judges, all connected with the movie music business, are hammering it out.
It's fascinating.
There aren't reasons that I don't like it.
There was more chords, there was more richness in the orchestration.
The strong thematic development, the solo violin, the transfer to the basses.
What exactly are they seeking? Aaron Zigman, who's composed music for several films, including John Q and The Notebook.
For me, the crux of it is the overall elements of their writing ability, and that deals with a melody and what happens inside the melody and their orchestration choices.
I'm the one music non-professional on the judging committee.
Dennis Malley from Turner Classics Programming Department.
So I'm totally approaching it from whether I get emotionally involved in what I'm seeing.
So here's the way 5 different composers scored the same short scene.
Very nice. It gets me right away.
Essentially, the orchestration took over.
And I like about half of the cue.
On the cut, the music changed. Shouldn't have changed there, because we haven't had...
After 3 hours of intense discussion, they picked the winner. Did you? What made the difference? For composer Linda Martinez, last year's winner.
I was just pulled into the story. Pulled into the characters, really felt like I was a part of the story.
Having heard the entries myself, I can tell you that was not an easy job.
And so, at long last...
Now, the moment we've all been waiting for. The top young film composer in the competition. The composer whose music was selected as the best from over 600 composers across the nation. Our grand prize winner is Michael Pickton.
So, you know, as you were sitting there, what was going through your mind?
You want me to speak?
I want you to speak.
So I'm thrilled. It's
a big night.
It's a big night. Mark Roberts. It's a big night.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Rita.
And a few months later, there he is. At a Hollywood sound studio, supervising his composition for the Temptress.
The first quarter note of 66 should actually be long. Dun, ya, dun, dun, dun.
The music that will now be heard every time Turner Classics plays this film. The music that could send Michael Pickton's career soaring as high as his dreams.
And now, a page from our Sunday morning almanac. March 8th, 1971. The final fade-out for one of Hollywood's earliest comic stars. For that was the day Harold Lloyd died at the age of 77. A bit player in some early comedy shorts, Lloyd found box office success once he started playing a bespectacled everyman. In hit film after hit film in the 1920s, he proved himself a master of the well-timed and sometimes death-defying stunt. His encounter with a clock in the 1923 film Safety Last is one of the most iconic scenes in movie history. A peril he reprised at greater length in the 1930 film Feet First. Yet for all that high-rise daring-do, Feet First was one of Harold Lloyd's last movies. A silent star at heart, Lloyd failed to find his footing in the new world of talking pictures. and largely disappeared from public view for many years. Until 1962, that is, when he returned with an anthology film of many of his classics called Harold Lloyd's World of Comedy.
We thought you'd be interested in meeting one of America's great comic geniuses.
In an appearance on the CBS show Calendar that same year, he talked with Harry Reasoner about the distinctive character he had created for his films.
When I adopted the glasses, it more or less put me in a different category because I became a human being. He was a kid that you would meet next door or across the street.
Or very far above it.
It is concert day at the Michigan Theater in Ann Arbor. But the orchestra is not tuning up to play a symphony.
For Nosferatu.
The conductor is Gillian Anderson, and the music is the reconstructed original score by Hans Erdmann of the 1922 Dracula film Nosferatu.
It's a theatrical event. There is an energy in the room which automatically makes this an event. And you have, if you are lucky enough to have this with a huge audience in an original movie palace, you get even more of a sense of this flavor.
Gillian Anderson has restored live music to this and 18 other classic films from the silent era. She is an expert in matching music to action.
For example, the shipboard sequence where Nosferatu attacks all of the crew. If you just look at the film straight, it's completely stationary, it's totally static, and absolutely nothing happens. But the music has this wave-like quality to it. So you have the sense of motion coming from the music that you don't get from the image.
It wasn't love of movies that inspired her.
No, and I consider myself a film virgin at the time that I went into it because I never used to really watch films, and I wouldn't go to the movies very much, and I didn't know very much about them. But what did fascinate me was anything that moved to music.
As a musicologist for the Library of Congress, she discovered the score for The Passion of Joan of Arc. After reuniting the film with its music, Anderson found out she had a special gift for timing. The reconstruction process, synchronizing music to image, takes hundreds of hours.
I have an algebraic equation that my physicist husband has given me to work this kind of thing out. You count the number of beats in the music, and you multiply times 60 and divide and so forth.
And you can do this?
I can do this.
This is impressive.
And you use a metronome. And for example, when he fell down just now, I would write that into the score. I'd write it into the score at a particular measure.
So you would know where it fell, exactly,
right.
Where he fell and
where
it
he
fell.
And it fell, exactly. And that's how I keep things in sync.
Three years ago, while researching through the Chaplin family archives, Gillian Anderson found the original music for The Circus.
And what became very clear very quickly as I started to work on the reconstruction of The Circus was the music is fabulous. I mean, it's one of the things about Chaplin is that he was musically very, very knowledgeable, both classical music as well as popular music, and so the choices are so apt.
Anderson made another discovery, that for 60 years the circus had been projected too fast at the standard 24 frames per second. In fact, there was no standard speed for silent films. In the very early days, films were hand-cranked, and therefore the speed varied.
And so we looked at the film again, and from the way it looked, decided it looked more natural at 20 frames per second. Most people see Chaplin running around like a chicken with his head cut off. And of course, timing is essential to a comedian. So if he's running at the wrong speed, he's not going to be as impressive. At the slower speed, you can really see his jokes developing, and so he has a much greater impact. And then I found a baby with it, I had to get it.
Anderson also enhances the emotional impact of silent films with sound effects and uncommon percussion instruments.
This is a rain tree stick. This is the sound of Nosferatu.
Very creepy. At the National Gallery in Washington, the film series attracted large crowds thanks to Gillian Anderson. D.W. Griffith's Orphans of the Storm is a story about two sisters, played by Dorothy and Lillian Gish, trying to find each other in revolutionary Paris. The composer is William Frederick Peters.
The music is often a combination of classical and ragtime, and it changes tempo every 30 seconds.
It seems to me just the most staggering thing to be conducting nonstop, 2.5 hours.
Yes.
And how do you just keep going for that long?
I have a lot of energy, so that's not a problem for me. And it's always very energizing to just get a chance to do this.
In the process of restoring the sounds to silent films, Gillian Anderson, who knew very little about movies to begin with, has become a film historian and a missionary.
And my mission is to have the early history of film rewritten. This is the 100th anniversary of the celebration of the discovery of the motion picture. Almost all the books that have been written about the early years of film, up to 1929, have been written exclusively about the image. And yet, the artifact, the work of art, is a mechanical moving image and live musical accompaniment, often orchestral accompaniment. That is the art form.
Two-reelers is what some of the old silent movies were called. The characters were introduced and the story set going in the first reel, and then in the second came the drama and the complications and the final act. We had the first reel of the story you were about to see a while ago and could have showed it to you then. But something happened that made a second reel necessary. From David Browning now, a report that would have been about one man's passion, but is instead about that passion and about his death.
Hollywood, the place, and Hollywood, the legend, are two very different things. From its very early days, Hollywood, the legend, was where the men were tall and true, the women glamorous, and the endings always happy. But Hollywood, the real place, is often a shock to tourists. There's high crime, there's homelessness, and there's a sense of danger toward nightfall when the shadows lengthen across the stars. This is a story, a mystery really, with a very unhappy ending. A story about a landmark on the edge of Hollywood that to many was a shrine, a sanctuary, a theater devoted to films from a happier time, a time when the stars shined in silence.
They show all the different silence from the teens to the 20s, dramas, adventure, mystery.
The Silent Movie, the only theater in the country showing nothing but silent films. A labor of love for this man, Laurence Austin. Now you're the manager.
Manager.
You're the MC.
MC.
You're the projectionist.
Projectionist.
What else?
Well, I book the films, do all the bookkeeping, sell tickets, and I sell candy if necessary.
And business was good, thanks to audiences that included many young people attracted to the sound of silence.
They portray the full span of human emotion minus the voice. And it's really amazing. In this age, people probably think that isn't possible, and if you go to these things, you realize that it is.
Another attraction, this man, 84-year-old Bob Mitchell, the organist who could improvise for hours as the films unwound. A child prodigy who played for his first silent movie in 1924.
My mother started me at 4 years old, and I listened to Mozart and Beethoven and Brahms, and I think hearing that over and over and over again made it easier for me to improvise. They said, "You ever compose?" I said, "Oh yeah, lots of things. I regroup cliches."
A typical night at the silent movie would start with a cartoon.
Felix, of course, is an international cartoon character, became famous in the 20s, and is still famous today. I think he has a wonderful personality. Whoever did all the drawing, I think, must have really loved cats and studied cats.
There would be a short comedy or two.
Charlie Chaplin was a comedy genius, seems to just go on and on and on, you know. And it's remarkable because when you see some of these films, they were made way back in the teens, 80-some odd years ago.
And the feature attraction. Sometimes a melodrama, sometimes a comedy, sometimes a love story. This night, the film is Drums of Love.
It's a lost D.W. Griffith classic. It hadn't been seen since it was first released in 1928.
A movie made even as the curtain was coming down on the silent era. Mary Philbin, Don Alvarado, Lionel Barrymore.
They were remarkable for what they accomplished. And I feel that that likes of those people we will never see again.
As it turned out, we would never see Laurence Austin again. For just 2 days after we last spoke with him, Austin was shot and killed at his beloved silent movie by a hold-up man who escaped into the shadows of Hollywood.
Described as very neat, clean-cut looking.
An eyewitness helped police put together a sketch of the gunman. And outside the theater, there was a remarkable outpouring of grief and affection for Laurence Austin, and concern among silent film fans that with him gone, the last silent movie show might never reopen. On a warm winter afternoon, Laurence Austin, who grew up in Hollywood and saw it change from a sunny small town to a place where random violence is all too common, Laurence Austin was laid to rest, alongside many of the silent stars he adored: Theda Bara, Tom Mix, Clara Bow.
was Hollywood's infancy, when just a gesture or a glance was enough to light up the silver screen. A time, as Gloria Swanson once famously quipped, when stars had faces.
You're Norma Desmond. Used to be in silent pictures, used to be big.
I am big. It's the pictures that got small.
But Norma Desmond might have felt right at home at this premiere last week. The film getting all the attention was a quirky against-the-odds project entitled The Artist. Not only is it in black and white, but it's wordless, as in silent.
Action!
But this was shot in the Hollywood of today, with every high-tech sound recording device simply turned off.
No one shouting quiet on the set.
No, it was no.
The Artist is the brainchild of French director Michel Hazanavicius. Telling stories without words, he says, was a fantasy, the purest form of movie making.
Really, it's about images. I mean, you don't need dialogue. People think it's intellectual in a way, but it's exactly the opposite. I mean, it's very sensorial. It's a very sensual experience.
But selling silence in a town where avatars and transformers roam the studio backlots is no easy task.
When you went to people and said, I want to make a silent movie.
Well, at first they were smiling.
Like they thought you were kidding?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay, you want to do that. Yeah, okay, but what do you want to do for real?
He was for real. The script he wrote is about a silent movie star named George Valentin, played by French actor Jean Dujardin, complete with a sidekick. John Goodman plays Valentin's boss, a studio executive desperate to modernize by branching into talkies instead.
What was it about this role that attracted you?
Playing a big shot. Without lines.
Since there was no scripted dialogue, he and all the actors just made it up, acting out loud, even though the audience would never hear a word.
Because if I screwed up the dialogue that I was improvising, who cares?
You didn't have to memorize the thing.
Less work for Dad. Me like.
Not that it was easy. James Cromwell, who plays Valentin's loyal chauffeur, says on the silent screen, overacting is far too easy.
The difficulty for an actor is that you have no reference as to where to pitch your performance. Usually we gauge it by hearing ourselves speak. This, you have to rely completely on your facial expressions and your gestures.
And of course, the music, which becomes almost a character itself. It helps set the mood for what becomes a love story between Valentin, whose star begins to fade, and his beautiful chorus girl, who soon finds her voice in the talkies. To bring Peppy Miller to life, Berenice Bejo, the director's wife, spent hours studying classic Hollywood legends like Marlene Dietrich.
I used to watch all the way she winks, and she smoked cigarettes and hold her head and move, just because I needed to have a sense of what it was to be an American movie star.
But perhaps even the best movie star of old couldn't have done quite so much with a coat rack. Even her husband director was shocked.
I was like trying stuff, and I said, oh, I could do. And he said, oh, keep that, that is so funny.
Funny and charming. Those are the two words most often used to describe this film. It's gotten rave reviews at the film festivals in Cannes, Toronto, and Telluride. In fact, some people are even talking Academy Award. The last time a silent movie won an Oscar, it was the very first Oscar ever given, Wings, all the way back in 1927.
I feel blessed to have this film to watch. You know, it was so much fun. It made it look so easy.
Kenneth Turan, the LA Times film critic, sees just one downside of The Artist.
The hardest thing about this film is to convince people that they're going to like it. I've been telling people about it for months, and you can tell by the look in people's eyes. They say, yeah, you say it's good, but it's a silent film. I'm not going.
That would be a shame. Silence, says the director, has so much to offer.
When you want to tell to your wife you love her, for example, I mean, you can say, I love you. But if you just stop and you just look at her, something happens with no words. And I think usually it's more powerful.
Which is why we'll stop talking now, too.